continue with the security element of this thing, and here we're gonna manage passwords. And manage passwords is like, okay, big deal. We can manage passwords, and there are policies that we can establish. Many people are in the Windows world. A lot of corporates are in the Windows world. It's easy to manage. Is it got security vulnerabilities? Yeah, everything's got security vulnerabilities, but we can manage the passwords relatively easily there. And then we got security policies and password policies. The security policy, the formalized statement that defines how security will be implemented within an organization. Looked at that in Security Plus. It's kind of an overall statement, and we can have a security policy if it's a small company, kind of a concise. The security policy may include all the other policies, but typically we're going to have supporting policies to go along with it. And in this case, we're talking about the password policy. It's going to be a subset of the overall security policy document standards for creating, storing, and modifying passwords. What are they going to be? How long do they have to be? How long can we keep them? How long do we have to keep them? Do we have to use special characters? How should they be constructed? And I think many of us, and I won't say, and I'll say me too, many of us don't really necessarily do a great job constructing passwords. The password managers, I'll admit I use one, I use KeePass, generates some kind of different sort of passwords. And you can go into it and specify what you want in that. I had to do that for the MyPay constructed each of the other ones. Let's see, experience how reliable are the password vaults. I've not had, and this is just me, any real issues with it. Mine is stored locally. So some of the password vaults like that are stored in the cloud probably going to have some vulnerabilities. The thing that you get into, we all get into, is how many accounts do we have? And how many different passwords do we have to have? And again, this one is stored locally. So the LastPass, I use the Google Chrome passwords now and all that. Where is it stored? Keeper for 9 years, no problems. I haven't had any problems with this one. I don't know how long I've been using it for quite a while. And when you generate passwords with it, I've got a demo in here somewhere. I think that, yeah, I've made a demo account to look at one of these things. So what does one of their passwords look like? You can't make it any bigger, but it looks like that. Yeah, this is open source, free and all that other good stuff. What you can do, and what I had to do for DFAS, generate a password, just say open the password generator. You can specify the elements that you want, and in DFAS, yeah, uppercase or lowercase digits were available, but not all the special characters. Yeah, they changed that. 64 characters is crazy long, it is. And you can specify lots of different areas, but then the special characters that are allowed, I can specify down here so that I can now meet the requirements of the other end. And this is to get into my retired pay account. I have to generate a password, and you talk about crazy long. They were crazy long. It was like a 25 character password, and they had to have this. And it went on and on and on. And this was for a lot of old people, and eventually they had to back off on some of the stuff that they did. But when I go in here, I can do a 40-bit, 128-bit, a 256-bit hex key or random MAC address, and this was going to be built in to build if you need a random MAC address. The different number of bits that are available in each of these, down to the 40-bit and down to my little we're doing all elements here. So we have uppercase, lowercase. I don't see a number in there, but we have a special character, a couple of special characters available. So you can, and again, my DFAS one, that probably would qualify to do that. What happens if the network is down and you need one of the passwords? This one, again, this is not network dependent. This is locally stored on my computer, so networking is not an issue. And generally, if the networking is down, I'm not going to need the passwords because I can't get there anyway. Advantage to locally stored, obviously, is that you don't have the exposure, the cloud exposure for these things. To be able to get there. It's kind of like, and Microsoft's kind of gone to, or recommending, I think, that you use the PIN for authentication. Each PIN is locally stored, so you could have a couple of different machines using the same username and password instead of using the username, the Microsoft username, the Outlook username and password, or whatever you define. You can have a different PIN on each of the devices that you log into. So David says Google goes down or gets hacked, that he's screwed. Yeah, if you use those storages, and that's one of the reasons I've kind of shied away from those, and why I haven't really been all that in fear of KeePass, because it's stored locally and it is password protected to do those things. So anyhow, going through that, how are we going to do that? How are we going to keep? So the Google, yeah, when I went to Chromebook, exactly. And they did well, and their stock price just went crazy the other day. They're obviously during the lockdowns, they're doing all sorts of great business. And if you use Google Meet, which is I guess a free and a paid, I've never used it, but something similar to what we're using here that I saw this morning, that they're going to give it the paid version, the unlimited version. You get 60-minute meetings with the unpaid, but they're going to give it from early May until September the 30th while we're going on with this thing. But anyhow, back to the policies. And the policies, what do we need? And remember that the policy, the max age for these things, what we go to the maximum age for is to recognize that at some point these passwords can be cracked. And yeah, we have these really long strings, but if you're using rainbow tables, it takes about 15 minutes, I think 17 minutes is what they say, to crack a password. It uses pre-constructed hashes, and passwords are typically going to be hashed, uses pre-constructed hashes, so it just has to go through those. It doesn't have to, in the brute force area, it doesn't have to create the hash as it goes along. So lots of different ways to do that if you can get the hash. And then we go back to how do we protect all of the different things that we have, the elements that we have. Length 8 to 12 characters. The 8 minimum comes in, and many of, I want to say most, but many of the password cracking softwares actually will take the password and the hash and split it in half. And the first 7 characters of the password represent the first half of the hash. And if it's only 7 characters, it's going to be a filler for the rest of it when we put it in. And that's going to be the same for everything. So if we only have a 7-character password, it only has to crack half of it. It doesn't have to crack the other half. So, and it's all going to be the same. 8 to 12 characters recommended, and I think these are probably Microsoft's recommendations. Complexity, a mix of numbers, letters, numbers, special characters. When you configure a password policy, and you can configure those on your local machine with your local security manager, or let me see if I can get something up here to do this with a computer manager. I think it is. We want to, well, we're going to go to And remove snap-in, that's what I want. My computer's running really slow today. Local, I want the local security, users and groups, local security manager, and I guess that computer management. And it's not going to give it to me. David Soul distracted you, yeah. And it is something that is an issue, and those are all good points that you made to do those things. Well, anyhow, I'm going to go to Active Directory in a minute. Anyway, mix of letters or characters, special characters, in order to specify. And if you've ever run one of the cracking softwares, and they've become a lot more sophisticated over the years, when you throw special characters in, it complicates the situation a little bit. Several years ago, when the machines weren't nearly as powerful, if you added special characters to one of them, Lofcrack, I think it was, it increased the projected time to crack the password immensely. You would go from days or minutes to weeks or years in order to crack those passwords. It doesn't mean that it's not going to hit on it the first time. It just means that's the average time. The duration, 30 to 90-day replacement. How long can we keep the passwords? The objective here is to renew the password so that by the time it's cracked, it's intercepted and cracked, because it can eventually be cracked, that it's no longer of any value. And you probably do. I get these emails that says, oh, we've got your username and password, and yeah, they got a password that's, probably 8 years old to do those things. Anyone remember the formula for determining how long it takes? I don't. The password based on the complexity. I don't remember that. The history, 12 to 24 passwords are stored. Sharing and storage, the prohibit where possible and secure when not. So where are we going to store these things? And this is where we get into, okay, you have a unique password for every account that you have, and you saw the password manager that I was using there, KeePass. How many different accounts are in there? I mean, some of them are kind of sensitive, like my pay account and my VA account, those things. And some of them are just kind of, who cares? Walmart. I don't have any payment methods stored with them. So, okay, if somebody wants to get onto my Walmart account, I'm not real concerned about it. What I do want to do, if I can get this over here and if I can find it, the last time I poked around and made myself look like a fool, so I may do that again today on Active Directory, because it's been so long since I've done anything with it. And when we go to an Active Directory machine, then we get logged in, and we'll try to do a full screen on this one. Okay, I was trying to do the certificate. I've got a certificate server, certificate authority running on this, but it's not one that will allow me to do anything. So if I go here, administrative tools, and this is, see, I changed all these things around on me, and now I can't find anything that I'm looking for. Active Directory users and computers. I want the policy on a group policy management. So we can create in the Windows environment the group policy objects, the default domain policy. If I would go in and edit it, then the policies, I don't want the administrative template, I think. Control panel network. This is where I got myself in trouble the last time in policies. Software settings. When we talk about that, yeah, we can just go in and we can install software. We can do it here. Windows setting has security settings most likely here. Account policies. So let's see if we can make this a little bigger. In the account policies, password and account lockout policies, the Microsoft, and I can't make these any bigger, but the defaults for them, the password is 24 passwords remembered, the password age 42 days, the minimum password age 1 day. The minimum password age is one of those things that we don't think about a whole lot, but can be significant. What it says is I got to keep it for so long. I used to use, I think, 5 days, and by the time somebody's used a password for 5 days, they're probably not interested in trying to get back to something else. The number remembered, obviously you can't reuse it, okay, 24, whatever it is. The minimum password age, we have that, let's say that we have the 42 days or 30 days or whatever else it is, and that we didn't have, or we had 8, and we have the large number. If I didn't have a minimum password age, my password is password, and then I would use password 1, password 2, password 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and I can come back to the one that I had and keep that password. The minimum password age kind of keeps you from doing that. Minimum length here, 5 characters, doesn't meet the recommendation 8 to 12, and we should make that longer. Complexity requirements enabled, and I may have been playing with this one. That may be why I think that the default characters is different from what goes on here. Complexity requirements, and this is just to enable and disable. And the reason that I said that I probably had changed that one just to play with things is because by default this is disabled on the in Active Directory, and we either turn it on or turn it off. Complexity in the Microsoft world is uppercase letters, lowercase letters, numbers, and special characters. You have to have 3 of the 4 for these things. Stored and reversible encryption, and I see all sorts of what that one is for to do those things. And you don't want to do that. Reversible encryption means that it is a reversible one. Lockout policies, how long and how many attempts do you get, bad attempts, before the account gets locked, and then how long is it going to stay locked before you can use it again. You can have it locked at Synclant Fleet, where we were doing secret material. If we locked our account, then it stayed locked until you presented yourself to IT and said, I need to have my account unlocked. Couldn't call them, any of those other things. And I think we got like 3 attempts, and they would assign us passwords. We didn't get to pick them for ourselves. But account lockout duration, and then the threshold, 5 valid. And this one says 5 invalid login attempts within a 30-minute time. The account lockout, 30-minute time, reset account lockout after. Then it will be reset after 30 minutes. And then you have a Kerberos policy down here if you want to change it. You can change it, but 600 minutes maximum lifetime. 600 minutes maximum lifetime for a user ticket, a service ticket, 600 minutes. 600 minutes is what, 10 hours? Maximum lifetime for a user ticket, 10 hours. So when you get a certificate in Kerberos, it's going to be valid for 10 hours that we would use it for. Just a look at, if you're in an Active Directory environment, the things that you could do when you do those things. Keep trying without getting locked out. You don't have the policy set. The question is, I don't understand about brute force cracking. How does someone keep trying without getting locked out? In a case that you don't have a lockout policy, you can keep doing that. The other way they would do that, Michael, is intercept the hash, because hashes are what gets sent back and forth. And when we go back to the equipment that we're using, if we're sending hashes back and forth through a switch, we've given ourselves some protection by having knowing that the traffic only goes to the MAC address that it's intended for. But if somebody can intercept the hash, then they can import it into the cracking software and run the hash cracking softwares against them. So the issue here would be in being able to get the hashes. Some of the softwares, if you can get into Active Directory, I had in an MCSE course a student who was the network administrator at a privately owned company, and he was upgrading from one version of Windows to the other, and he was convinced that the passwords were not very good on the system that people were using, and we were playing again with a password cracking software in the security portion of it. And he said, I want to take this to work. And since he was the administrator, he could download all the hashes in Active Directory. He did that, ran the cracking software against it, was able to crack them all, and found some of them were pretty good. Some of them were really bad, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. What that done, and back to data driven, allowed him to then go to the owner of the company and say, hey, we have a problem. And they did some negotiation where they could he could beef up the password policy requirements, but the users didn't have to change them as frequently. How secure, what's the risk, all things that you need to make. And this goes back to the convenient versus secure. It's convenient to never have to change the password. It's not really very secure because at some point they may come back to you. Instead, I get emails, a couple of them, pay me this, pay me that, and here's a username, here that, and this is not you, and yeah, it was 5 years ago, 8 years ago, whatever else, password that has been gone away for a while. Cisco authentication. Let's look at this slide and then we'll take a break. The console, the local and direct, Telnet and SSH. And we've looked at some of these. Yesterday when we did the AAA, we configured a radius server so that we had to go off onto the radius server, and we have them up here, the TACAX or the radius server. The directory services, and this is just indicating that we can refer it to directory services. We can create a database on the radius server should we want to. And David was talking about having to troubleshoot Moodle. We used Moodle and we then linked it to the Active Directory database, which at its heart is an LDAP database. So we could configure the one component, Moodle or Radius, and Radius can read the Active Directory database so that you can use it in order to have your users usernames and passwords. Kind of goes back to at least a modicum of attempt at the single sign-on for these things, single password, using the same database. Problem with that is the system gets compromised, the password gets compromised, you just compromised a whole bunch of different resources. So we could have that, the Telnet, the username, and the different things, the different elements of Cisco that we've looked at. We had the local database, and we could specify the privilege level. We looked at that, I think, where I made one. And we did privilege level 15 so that when we logged on, we were automatically in privilege exec mode. We didn't have to go through the enable secret or the enable password, whatever we had configured. If we don't configure a privilege level, then we go into the user exec mode down here, the greater than. So privilege level, password only to get into these things. And then we go into the privilege exec with the enable secret. Or we can configure enable to use one of these other methods to get into it also when we do one or the other. But the ways that we have, when we start out, we have the password only, the single password. Everybody's using the same one. Not exactly the best thing to have unless you have a very small network where you only have one or two people that are getting into the systems. We could have the local database where we create the local username and password, and then we have to do in each of the terminals or the consoles we go in and say log in local. so that it tells it to use the local database for the login to do those things. And the other way is the AAA new model, where we use a radius server. We could also use a TACAC server. And those devices can either have their own database, or as this illustration shows, they can use different directory services in order to do the authentication. I'll get there in a second. So, and with one, Jeff asked about the formula, and I didn't find the formula, but this one's kind of and it only goes up to 2017, kind of an interesting one. How long will it take to crack a password? And let me go start this guy and have it generate a password, and let's see what it tells us. Yeah, just there. I think it was just I just thought it was kind of, I've seen this one before. I've never played with it before. If I can get my other one in here, and I would just use a password that I have, except that it shows you the text of it. Let's go back to this demo guy here and go in here, and let's generate something not absolutely outrageous. Let me generate one of my DFAST passwords. And let's see what it says about it. Copy and paste. So it says take 3 decades. And this was in 2015. And then you can go up, I think, or it could a minute ago. It's supposed to change the year here. And it went up to 2017, word list on off. Toggle on off to see how much faster. A word list makes this cracking, so this would be for a directory. Here we go. Yeah, 2016, and then 2015. Oh, I get it now. 2018 says it's going to take 2 decades, and I don't really believe that, but it still says 2 decades for this complex password. And this is just something to kind of see what goes on. They've got a little chart down here along how long is it going to take to crack, the number of characters. And again, if we go into something like rainbow tables is going to crack it in a matter of minutes, 15 minutes, 17 minutes, 20 minutes, something like that, because it has all of the hashes pre-configured on it. It doesn't have to do a whole lot of processing that we would do on those. The Cisco authentication, and again, we've looked at these and configured a lot of them. The local authentication, username and password are stored in the running config and the startup config file, so that they are there. We can use either, and we could use the password to have the unencrypted password or the secret word in order to configure an MD5 hash. The newer iOS's, by the way, and I think a slide comes up later, use a longer string, like a 256-bit hash instead of the MD5 hash. MD5 hashes, if we go back to the, and I don't know if everybody's seen this thing before, go back to the hash calc. When I look at these things, and I can go and put this password in that I had, and then the text string here, and we can calculate the hash on it. It's still, regardless of the length, the MD5 hash is going to be a fixed length. The MD4 hash, and MD4 is not used anymore. SHA-1, and there is a SHA-2, which is newer than this one is. 256, 384, 512. The different hashing algorithms that you've probably seen. And how big is the hash? How long is the hash? So the longer the hash, the bigger the hash, the more difficult it's going to be in order to do the encryption, the cracking. We'll go in here and let's see. I closed it, but generate another password, maybe one of those longer passwords, and look at the hash, and it's going to be a different hash. But it will be, the hash is going to be the same length. and they're always going to be the same. This is one of those outrageous ones. We'll copy and paste it in here. And then when we calculate the hash, the links are still the same. Password complexity in this one, yeah, this is, you're going to guess this one. I'm certainly not going to when we look at those things. So the hashing and passwords are typically stored as a hash. And the MD5, the longer one, the 256 bit hash, you can see that it is much longer, going to be much more complex than the MD5 that is stored in most of what or all of what we've seen for these things. Remote authentication, AAA new model in order to activate this new method of authentication. Usernames and passwords on a radius server, TACAC server, or on separate directory services. And again, if you're in an Active Directory domain, and I'm sure you can do the same thing with Linux, although I have never done it, and I know that you can make Linux machines members of Active Directory too. Haven't done that in a long time, so don't ask me how. I don't remember. Remote authentication, the usernames and the passwords are stored on a radius or a TACAC server, the local database on the server, which means that we can use that single sign-on, that single IP address, that single database in order to authenticate to the multiple devices, and we don't have to go in and configure a username and password on each of the devices. And then we would go, if we did that and we want to change the password, now we got to go to all the devices and change the passwords for all of the users that go on. Whereas if we're using central authentication, always going to make things a little bit simpler. Central authentication, something gets compromised, the password gets compromised, we can change it, and now voila, the password is changed for all of the devices on the network. Upsides, downsides, configuration, what kind of services do you have to have, can you use for each of these things. Logging in with the password only or as a user with privilege level 1 displays the user exec prompt. That was the original method that we did, and its login it didn't really have a password. We can, if we use the username and password, if we don't specify the privilege level 15, or if we have configured other privilege levels, then we're going to get at the user exec, and then where are we going to go from there? What kind of authentication do we need in order to have higher levels of authorization on these things? The enable password, we've looked at it, is stored on the device. This says with weak encryption. By default, it's stored with no encryption. Encryption is turned off in the default configuration file with the no service password encryption. We can turn it on with service password encryption, type 7 encryption, pretty simplistic, and if you want to try those things and crack, and I think if you search for a crack Cisco password, you can find software on the internet that will crack it for you pretty quickly. Issue here becomes being able to see these things for the other users, and this goes back to how much access do you want to provide from different locations. We're going to telnet, we're going to SSH. If we are, what kind of login are we going to require for these things, so that prevent the curious from getting onto the system and seeing the more sensitive passwords that might be stored in the iOS. The other kind of, I guess, argument against having local passwords is stored in the iOS instead of stored on a server someplace, an authentication server, an Active Directory server, a radius server, whatever we're going to use for those things. Enable secret password MD5 authentication for most of the devices that we're using. All of the ones that we've seen that we've used in the packet tracer, and I think probably in the BOSA NetSim of all, if you use the enable secret, have used MD5, and that's what the 5 is for when we look at it. The different kinds of passwords that have been were available for these things. And then the cipher here, the machines that can be used, have been used for those things. Type 5, the MD5. Type 7, service password encryption, the Vignette cycle, and the Type 8, password-based key derivation, SHA-256 for those, and the new ones, and then it uses the scrypt, the Type 9 for iOS 15.3 and above. So as we progress through the operating, so the versions of the iOS, the complexity of the password, or the complexity that's available for the passwords, does increase. Yeah, Type 9 is only on the newer systems for these things. iOS 15.3, I don't have anything that can demonstrate that. It's going to use a longer, more complex hash. Is what we're going to see for these things. And remember, the hashing algorithm, kind of back to, if we can get the hash and the algorithm, we know the algorithm, we can not decrypt, but we can create a hash that is the same as the one that was there. And it may be different character strings that does that. The thing that they're trying to do, it's secure crypt, scrypt. And I think scrypt is an actual commercial vendor. I'm not sure on that one. I don't have anything that's that new, so I haven't been able to play with it for those things. With those when we do that, all of my GNS3s are all old iOSs, and then as far as I can tell, I haven't really looked that closely, but I don't think Packet Tracer supports the newer processes for these things, which go from one to the other. Password complexity helps protect, because a complex password is less likely to be guessed or cracked. And the formula there, and we kind of looked at that website a little bit. Is it going to be accurate? Do I really believe it's going to take whatever it was, 4 decades, 3 decades to crack that password? I really don't, but the special characters are going to make it more difficult to do that. If you can get, and I think Loftcrack's actually back in business. If you can get a copy of it, it will show you how to go from one to the other. There's another one called Offcrack, which is a kind of a version of, it is a version of Rainbow Tables, a simplified version of Rainbow Tables. Go through and look at it. It's a pretty sophisticated little piece of software. Usually you just boot and then go back to just boot. Well, then that goes back to another thing when we're talking about security. Do we want to turn off booting on the DVD drives, the CD drives, and as well as not allowing it? And I'm sure that, I know that the government stopped flash drives at all. So we want to be able to allow those things to happen. And when we're talking about security, it goes way back to the BIOS. Are we protected the BIOS? Have we protected the case so that the user can't reset the BIOS? Can't change the boot sequence? All of those different things. Password complexity. Can't get to the hash in order to be able to try to crack the hash using one of the sophisticated programs that are available. And back to the thing that we looked at yesterday, the charts we looked at yesterday, as the tools increase, the power of the tools have increased, the sophistication required of the compromiser, the hacker, have decreased as we have gone over time. And there's an awful lot of tools that are available in a lot of different places. We looked at these in the windows: the minimum password length, allowable characters, required characters, prohibitions, dictionary words, and if you can get something and do a comparison, dictionary words, and there are a lot of dictionaries on the internet, whether they're vulgar or whatever they are, they get in the dictionary. It doesn't take very long. It's just a matter of going down the list and comparing the one to the other. What a lot of the new crackers are kind of hybrid, not kind of, but they are hybrid crackers, where they will go through the hash, find the dictionary words, and then use brute force on the remaining components of the hash. So consecutive or repeated characters, not so good. A few years ago, somebody did a survey, and I don't know who, and I don't even know that this is real, but it's a good story, that they'd gone into the London, England subway system and offered to buy people's passwords for a candy bar, and like half of the people would sell their passwords for a candy bar. So what's it worth? And it goes back to education, training for the individuals, how important these things are. What are they protecting? Where are they? Don't stick them on the monitor on a sticky. Don't tape it underneath your keyboard or under your calendar, top drawer of your desk. And you guys that have done this probably found them in some pretty odd places too. Alternatives to passwords and multi-factor authentication. Things that we would prefer to do, and in the multi-factor, something we know, something we have, something we are, and then something we do, the behavior, in some place that we are. Some authentications, you've got to be in a specific location before you can actually authenticate. Behavior, things like your handwriting could be a behavior, something that you do. So we've added a couple of elements to that, from the something we know, username and password, something we have, smart card, or something we are, fingerprint scan, iris scan, different biometrics that are available. And then the location, and you've been in places that to access certain things, you have to be in certain locations to get from one location, or use different networks, secure networks, or only go into certain areas. Military, particularly for that, and I think we'll go with Michael's because he's done this in the field. And to be on that network, you got to be in the field. You got to be there in order to do those things. And then the behavior, something that we do. And this could be even typing. The reason that these work is you do type in a kind of a unique manner. Your handwriting, the pressures that you use, it's not just the shape of the characters, but how you actually would do a signature, how fast you go, what kind of pressures that you use, as well as the shape of the characters that do these things. Digital credentials, and you have used, and we all have used to some extent because we use a credit card, a digital credential. Verifiable cryptographic signature is what we're talking about here in order to use these things. Different ways to do them. A one-time password, a hardware token generated by a pseudo algorithm. The one-time passwords are usually good for about a minute. String of characters. The device that we have has to be synchronized, obviously, with the authentication server, so that when we put in that character string, it's going to actually make sense. And it's not going to be able to be reused. One of the ways to do those things. A hardware token is going to store the one-time password generator or a certificate in order to be able to generate these things that become usable, that are usable from one to the other. Could have a software token, a magnetic stripe on a card, and some places are still using those for credit cards. There was recently a compromise on gas pumps, and I guess the people that sell gas knew that there was, and not everybody's gone to the chip. And one particular chain, Wawa, which is, I don't even know where it is, I had heard of it before, got a bunch of their gas pumps compromised because they were still using the magnetic strips and people were getting information stolen from them, obviously. New England area. Okay, so there, but they did get compromised. Maybe that's why I've driven through Pennsylvania. My parents used to live there, so maybe that's where it kind of comes back to. I don't remember where it was to do those things. So, and there are lots of areas that we can now get our credit cards compromised that we never had before. Gas pumps with the readers that somebody's going to put on there to steal the information. Used to, you had to go inside maybe to use your credit card. Now you can use it at the pump. Lots more opportunities to do compromising. The smart card contains a chip. You have skimmers, employees of drive-thrus, and there have been around here, not in the immediate area, but south of here, and some of them report on the local news, a skimmer at a gas pump, a skimmer here, a skimmer there, to do things, to get things. People taking videos at the ATM to try to get your PIN that you're putting in to do those things. But smart cards, they have a cryptographic chip. They've got a certificate associated with them, and then we can have contact or contactless. The near field communication for the phones, and I don't know, maybe some of you guys use that. Mine says it has the capability. I've never done that. Can it be compromised? It's not going, it doesn't go very far. We're talking about millimeters for the range of it, but it is one of those that if it is broadcast in the air, it can be intercepted. Let's see. When you go to UK, I'm so annoyed to have to insert the chip. Everyone uses near field communication in the cards. It can be. Can it be intercepted? Yeah. Is it easy to intercept? No. And back to our convenient versus secure. And David says here that they're annoyed that they don't have to insert their chip, so they use near field communication. Near field communication. Tap the card, wave the phone. Lot more convenient, but probably not as secure as inserting the card with the chip on it to do the transfer of information for these things. Biometrics, nothing new here. Again, fingerprints, voice patterns, retinal patterns, facial recognition. Some hardware, keyboards and mobile phones contain the biometric technology. Facial recognition, I think, is becoming the new thing with a lot of phones to do that. Mine's not nearly that sophisticated. None of my devices are. I'm a cheapskate. I use the old-fashioned way with pens, or now the shapes of that we use on those things. You need to enable that in order to protect the information on the backside. It uses those things as part of the encryption process. Just like when we want to do SSH on our devices, our Cisco devices, we need to use name it. It's got to have a host name as well as a domain, because it uses that as part of the generation process. Digital certificates, and these are things that I'm sure that you have looked at. An electronic document used to identify person, device, organization, or other entity. It just basically says you're who you claim to be. Used to be big, just to have to get really close to someone, like in the subway. Exactly, you're talking about the near field communication. Yeah, NCIS had and I think I watched all of their episodes at least once. Had one that they were looking for a card, and they were wandering around in an airport or a bus station or a subway terminal or something with their little sensor looking for a particular credit card to do those things. They do transmit, and they for a while were selling the RFID proof, or the transmission proof wallets that would secure so that somebody couldn't intercept your information. All things to consider when we do these things. Certificate authority, signed certificates provide more security. We can have self-signed certificates, and I want to go to my certificate manager, I think. Manage user certificates. RFID protection, yeah. Each of these things, and again, my machine's running a little slow this morning. The certificates themselves, you can look at all of the certificates that are on your machine. And when we talk about certificate authorities, I've got a personal certificate in here. I think I've got one that is, this is going to be a self-signed or a signed by somebody else. It's signed by my certificate authority that I gave myself. And I was trying to put its root certificate on this machine earlier today, and I've managed to not be able to get it installed. So everything generated by this Active Directory machine that I've downloaded here is not protected. The details on these things, they have a number of elements that are available, the subject, the public key, and if you ever wonder what a public key looks like, you can see the public key in these things. And this uses a SHA-256 a hash, and then the issuer, valid from, to the dates that it's valid from. LeaderQuest, I think it was in February, had an issue with, and it's not them, it's the people that does their certificates, hadn't renewed the certificate, and it came up as invalid. People couldn't get logged in, or you had to go around and say, okay, yeah, I get it, because the certificate had expired. The expiration date had happened on these things. The certification path that goes on them, and then this CA certificate is not trusted. To enable trust, install this certificate in the Trusted Root Certification Authority. So I should be able to go in here, the trusted people, where is it? Trusted publishers, Trusted Root Certification Authorities. Let's see if we can make this thing trusted. Let's all tasks, open, request, export. I just want to move it. Let's do a copy in certificates and see if we can put it in here. And that's what I thought. Now import. Welcome to the import. We're not going to go through that, but you can import the certificates in here, so it would become a Trusted Root Certification Authority. The roots are the only ones that in here that can be self-signed. DigiCert certification path, it's self-signed, but since it's in my Trusted Root Certification Authorities here, it's okay. So I will now accept certificates that are signed by all of these guys, the trusted third parties. Kind of like everybody always talks about driver's licenses or certificates that are signed by a trusted third party, the state, whatever state you're in, and each state will then recognize the driver's licenses of the other states to go from one to the other. What I wanted to do is go to a couple of places and see a couple of elements here. And one of them is the alternate signatures, and again, we're me not going very fast today. Let's see, connection is secure, certificate is valid, and here is the certificate I think that I want to look at. In the details down here we have subject alternative name, so we can use a single certificate, and this is something that's moderately new, as well as the wildcard certificate. The first time I ever saw one of those, I said this is not valid, because the only other wildcard certificate I had ever seen had been attempted to be issued by Can't Enable to do these things. But in this one, and this is Old Employer, these are the different FQDNs, fully qualified domain names, DNS names, that can use this certificate. So this is what the subject alternative name is all about. You go to the certification path. It is signed by one of the Trusted Root Certification Authorities, and then let's encrypt and on down the line until we get to this particular certificate. This would be the issuing authority, and generally the root authority is not going to be the issuing authority. If the certificates get compromised, and this is a public key, private key sort of arrangement that we've talked about, so that the public key anybody can have, the private key, identification key, the things that we're using here. If the certification authority gets compromised, all of the certificates are then considered compromised. A few years ago, there was a certificate authority that got compromised. It was a Dutch authority, and they are out of business now when we go along, when we look at those things, because I think it was the Iranians actually compromised them, and they started issuing certificates. And once they start issuing certificates that are invalid, then the certification authority is no longer going to be trusted. Self-signed certificates are easy to create, but aren't going to be trusted by the different authorities. On internal local area networks, Active Directory, and I know you probably get tired of looking at these things, but Active Directory can, or Windows servers actually, can become a certification authority. And that's just a matter of installing the software on it. This Windows machine over here, the Active Directory machine that we were looking at, is a certification authority. This is connecting to it. I was just going to go through, and it says the certificate's not valid, and I haven't put the root certificate in the correct location, and it drives you crazy whenever you do this. I'm going to see if it will actually let me do something here and go try to collect my certificate. And this is to get an email protection certificate, an email signing certificate. Company, and we'll just do ECPI and Department IT, and we'll just use something here, US, and down here tells us what the cryptographic provider. There are a number of them that are available, and as I recall, some of these work and some of these don't. Enable strong private key protection. I'm not going to do. I'm going to try to submit. Is requesting a new certificate on your behalf. Should you allow it? I'm going to say yes. We're waiting for a server response, and it may or may not respond because of all of the other certification requirements that are unnecessary, and it may not even be running. Okay, autocomplete. So it says it's been received. I can now go to the certificate authority and let's see if it actually has been received. We have the certificate authority here. We have revoked certificates, which I don't have any. Issued certificates, pending requests, and this is the one that I just did. So this is the request that we just did, and I can go in here in the all tasks. It says that I want to issue it. So if I issue this certificate, it's now on this list. I can go back to, do you want to turn, let's just leave me alone. It says that I can go back and get the certificate. Your certificate has been received. However, you must wait for the administrator to issue the certificate. Your request ID is 4. Return to this website in a day or two or after somebody does things and collect your certificate. So now I should be able, since I've issued it, to go back here and see, view the status of our pending certificate request. Wake up. Maybe it's not going to give it to me. Yeah, it's going around. Everything's running slow on my network this morning. It may be because I used the 127, but okay. So here is the certificate. Click on it, and now I can install this certificate is adding one or more certificates to your certificate store. So now it is part of my certificate store, and I should be able to use it. Should be able to export it, import it into Outlook or something like that, and use it as an email signing certificate. Of course, since it's issued by a device that is untrusted, kind of a self-signed, not kind of a self-signed certificate, it's not going to be respected by anybody. It'll come up and say that it's not a valid certificate, but you can kind of see that it's there and kind of see the process that goes on in the certificate authority and in the certificate issuing process. Use a certificate authority assigned certificate for any network that has WAN links, and back to the for a local area network, we could install that certificate authority, and if it's Active Directory, it'll automatically do that. Put it on a chip I've never done that. I don't know the answer to that. You have to have a writer. So as long as you have something to do the install, just like putting it on the hard drive here, similar process that's going to go into these things. But you just have to have the hardware in order to be able to do that, to make it trusted. The production of those things is a process in its own right, as far as I can tell when we do that. But once you've got the certificate that's been issued, and that's going to identify you, that one's going to identify me that I put in at that email address, and that's the only place that it would be valid to do the signing. Once you do that, it's a matter of having the hardware to put it onto the chip, to write it onto the chip. It's easy to place as it is for a stranger to read or corrupt. Probably when you do that, but if you replace it, then it's going to be, that certificate is not going to be valid in those circumstances, because it's not going to be something that's recognized to do those things. It depends on how you set them up. We set up one time, just out of curiosity, we had some authentication on an HTTPS site. Issue a certificate, you could authenticate with the certificate. So, but it had to be a trusted certificate in order to do that. So yeah, can you replace it? Sure, you can replace it. You can write over those things, because you have to be able to write it initially to save it initially, so you can replace it. But if it's not going to be something that's trusted, it's not going to do you any good to do that. Can they be corrupted? Sure, anything can be corrupted when we get those things. And what he says, Michael says here, is we're talking about, if somebody gets it, can they use it? Generally, these things are going to have pins associated with them too. And the pin is going to be used in part of the encryption and decryption, encrypt and decrypt the certificate to protect it. So you have to put the pin in, the correct pin in order to make the certificate to be activated in the process for those things. The certificate authorities are the trusted third parties, signs and revokes certificates, and you saw that we can issue and we could revoke certificates, or we can suspend certificates. Must show themselves trustworthy. A certificate practice statement has to be available for these things. The root certificates are typically going to be out-of-band distribution, which means that they're not going to be on the network sort of distribution. The certificate authorities, generally speaking, and not having been one, but the things that you read, the process that they use is they generate the root certificate, and then they sign the certificates for the issuing authorities with the root certificate, and that's kind of the chain that we see in the certificates that we have. They then take the root server offline, so they can't be compromised. And again, if they are compromised, and you can do a Google search about root certification authority compromise, and read all about it. But they were compromised. All their certificates are now invalid. Everything that they had issued, and everything that any of their issuing authorities had issued, are all now bad, because the signing certificate, the top level signing certificate, has been compromised for those things. The root certificates, out-of-band distribution, certificate generation, we do them for limited purposes, multi-domain. wildcard, extended validation. The extended validation is a process, and lately I think that maybe Chrome still changes the color of the website for the ones that have had extended validation. Edge doesn't, and let me see if you go to Bank of America and Navy Federal, one of them did and one of them didn't. What the extended validation does is they use more extensive researching of the process in order to be sure that whoever applied for the certificate actually is the individual that got the certificate, that we're using the proper process. Now neither one of them is changing the colors here like they used to. They used to change the color of these things. Now it just says that the connection is secure when we do those things. But extended validation, more extensive research into what's going on. Years ago, it took 3 months at his last job. It can take a long time in order to do that, but it then gives a greater assurance that when that certificate gets sent to you, that yeah, you really are connected to Navy Federal Credit Union, or that you're connected to LeaderQuest or wherever else, so that when you put in your credentials, that you know the credentials are going to the correct location to do those things. Wildcards, and then the multi-domain, we looked a little bit about that. That site used to use a wildcard certificate, but they've gone to the alternative names, the list of names that are available on the certificates. The hierarchies that are used in here, the single certificate authority or a group of a certificate authorities, the parent and the child. And in all these processes, the top level is going to sign certificates for the next level down, and they can then use that authority in order to issue certificates. Works in a parent-child relationship with the certificate authorities above and below it, ensures that the CAs distribute the workload and provide certificates more efficiently when we do those things. If a CA is compromised, only its children are compromised. All of its children, only its children. Its children are compromised as well. The whole chain is going to be compromised. And again, the only one that I know of that's been compromised is out of business. It could not survive the compromise. The chain of trust, an entity validates a certificate from the bottom of the hierarchy to the top. The certificate may be signed by another certificate authority, which is signed by another certificate authority above it. What we're looking for, and you can think of it as a chain of custody, but a chain of responsibility, a chain of trust from one to the other. The PKI, the public key infrastructure, uses that. There is a PGP uses a trust that well, what do they call it? Anyhow, it's not a chain of trust. In it, instead of having a centralized, you share your certificate with the other user. PGP is pretty good privacy, which now is privately owned. Used to be open source. GPG is the open source one now. Web of Trust is what they use. So what in the Web of Trust, in the PKI, public key infrastructure, we have our certificate authority up here that signs the certificates on down the line. We'll just say a chain. In the Web of Trust, we'll call it WOT, Web of Trust here, we have something like MIT has one, and I think it's pgp.mit.edu, has a place where me can send my public key here, and then you can go get my public key and put it on your keychain. So I'm going to have a keychain, or I can go get yours and put it on my keychain. So when I want to send an encrypted email to you, I go to my keychain and get your certificate and encrypt the email or the document or whatever I'm using with your public key. So the public key is used to encrypt these things, and I send it to you. You use your private key in order to decrypt it. If you play with it, I think that if you get PGP, you get a 30-day trial or something like that where it'll work automatically. And the last time that I used it, it worked automatically for about 30 days. And after that, it still worked, but you had to do more manual work with it. But PGP, pretty good privacy, been around for a long time. Not Norton. One of the antivirus softwares bought it. GPG is the open source version of it that you can use. Web of Trust. You gotta share your public key with whoever you want to be able to send you encrypted email. So it's another, not as convenient as some of the other things that go on. Crypto key go unaccounted for somewhere in the world, and it disrupted communications around. Yep. As everyone had to get a replacement distributed and loaded. We had an incident, not a good day. We had an incident, not that severe, but the radioman had the wrong day or the wrong time or the wrong something, and we couldn't communicate because they kept putting in the wrong key. We didn't compromise, we're just using the wrong key. And it doesn't work when we do those things, to go from one to the other. When we do compromise. Compromised keys are a really big deal if it goes missing. And these are all pre-shared keys, single point of failure. These are all what we would call pre-shared keys, because you go to a central location, or at least when we get ready to go deployment on a ship, we go to a central location, and you get your crypto. You get your next 2 months worth or 3 months worth of crypto, and you store it in a vault, in a safe, and you've got to inventory it to be sure that you haven't lost it, because if you do lose it, what Michael's talking about there, then the bad guys can intercept all your communications, because they probably know about the hardware. All they need is the key in order to do the cracking of it. So this is another one I should have just continued for 2 more, and then we'll do a new topic here. But the root certificate authority is the topmost in the hierarchy. It's the one that uses the self-signed certificate. The subordinate CAs, or the issuing authorities, it's going to sign their certificates, and then each signs certificates on down the line. Self-signed certificate must be secure. If compromised, all the other certificates become invalid with it. Any authority below the root in the hierarchy is going to be a subordinate authority that can issue certificates based on the authority of the root. So that issues certificates, renew, suspend, revoke certificates as needed. We saw kind of how that's done. That